Good morning from WKYT News. I'm Bill Bryant, hoping you are weathering the winter weather. We've had a major brush with winter in the Commonwealth. It had been a mild start to the season, but that has all changed now, and we may have more events to come. For today's program, we talked with Lexington Mayor Jim Gray and with a man who is in charge of snow removal for the city, Albert Miller, 34 years on the job, and that was as they were getting ready for this weekend's winter event. So we'll be talking about the preparations, and hopefully things have gone well by the time this broadcast is seen over the weekend. We'll talk about how the city has expanded its capacity to remove snow. Again, keep in mind our conversation coming as the snow is moving in. First, we'll also talk with Mayor Gray about his State of the City address, in which he said Lexington is firing on all cylinders. What does that mean? Mayor Gray makes the case that Lexington is helping pace Kentucky's overall economy. Gray has confirmed that he is exploring a campaign for the U.S. Senate. That filing deadline is Tuesday. We don't know if he will give us any more hints about that in this interview, but we'll find out. And we want to welcome Mayor Jim Gray to Kentucky Newsmakers again. Thank you for coming. Again, we'll talk with Albert Miller from Streets and Roads, Mayor, in just a little bit. But you have talked about how Lexington has ramped up its snow removal capability after some frustration, certainly last year when we had those two major snows, especially off in a lot of neighborhoods where people found their streets to be pretty difficult for days.
Yeah, and so, you know, in the spirit of continuous improvement, which is what I believe in from a business career, Bill, what we did was we examined the performance in an after-action report. We examined performance, we examined opportunities for improvement, worked with the council. The council was vigorously involved in this effort and worked with Albert Miller and his team. And what was the outcome of that was that we're going to be doing more of what we did last year in terms of expanding the service area, adding almost 7 to 8% more road coverage, and we are using independent or outside contractors to supplement the city's crews. So working that system, and I call that a system because that's really what it represents. It represents a full systematic approach to actually doing a better job, improving what we've already done. And as I said to Albert, you know, every time we make these improvements, it just raises expectations. And the next thing you know that nobody wants to see, I think what folks want to see is that before the snow even hits that asphalt, that it's gone.
Well, you know, and you're right. Over the years, the city has improved its capacity, right, you know, as it could. But do people today have higher expectations of urban services being, you know, right there on the spot?
Well, you and I may remember when those tires were covered with chains.
Sure.
And to get through, and that was when the expectations were really lower. But in order to get business done today, in order for folks to get to work, in order for our kids to get to school, parents to get the kids to school, our school buses to actually maneuver and get to the locations they need to, well, we need these roads, we need them plowed, and we need them treated. And we all recognize that.
And then you come to a time like this where you have a tough system that moves through, and you just have to realize that some things are just going to slow down for a few days, right?
Yeah, and that's when we ask for patience, you know, and that's not unexpected. I think that the good news about our citizens in Lexington is that they recognize that when good work is being done. I've got Albert and his team get lots of praise from our council, get lots of praise from our citizens as well. And for that, you know, everyone's appreciative.
Earlier in the week before the storm moved in, you gave your State of the Merged Government address. Often leaders around the country talk about things being good or strong in a community, or sometimes when there are difficulties, they will own up to those difficulties going on. You have said that Lexington, though, is firing on all cylinders. Mayor, what did you mean by that?
Well, I mean that Lexington is today a model for growth, for economic prosperity in a really meaningful way. In our state, Lexington has created 1/3 of all the new businesses that have been created. And that tells you a lot about the vitality, a vigorous economy that's present in Lexington today. We've had 4 years of surpluses totaling almost $60 million. Went from deficits to surpluses. We've almost doubled a rainy day fund today. It's just north of $30 million. And what we've also done is take reforms in our health insurance plan, our employee health insurance plan. We've taken those reforms and our pension reforms, and together those have created almost $112 million in savings, while improving the plan, the pension plan, ensuring that our police officers and our firefighters have a solid pension that they can depend on, and while then also providing health insurance that our employees are able to depend on. With a new health clinic, for example, 78% of the patients being served by our health clinic have actually undertaken weight reduction planning, and that's given a real benefit. That's just an example. Those with diabetes have been treated more effectively. All this has come from a health reform plan that is saving us money and also providing better health care.
What are the elements in place, Mayor, that are making the local economy robust in Lexington?
Well, the University of Kentucky, we're a university city, and Bill, and what that means is that it's more than just a college town. So Lexington is a beneficiary of the University of Kentucky and a robust research engine that's represented there, the Transylvania College and University, and Bluegrass Technical and Community College. So you take all of this together, Lexington is a university city. And what we've seen is that university cities across the country, and there are a few of benchmarks for us, about 7, they recovered faster from the recession. Their economies recovered faster from the recession and have grown with a more vigorous way since the recession. And so I would say that because of our high education content in the city, also a solid base of manufacturing. Not as large a base of manufacturing, but a business community that's linked to a university community in a really compelling way.
What are the areas you want to invest in going forward?
Well, going forward, we've got new investments in paving and roads. We've got new investments in public safety. Importantly, new investments in public safety. In the last 4 years, we've increased our investment in public safety by 22%. In the last 4 years, we've invested $1.5 billion. $1.5 billion in public safety. And we're continuing progress in public safety. But we're also doing other major projects. We're renovating and restoring the historic courthouse. It's been a symbol of our city for more than 100 years. We're also investing in the Town Branch Commons, a project that will link our Legacy Trail to the north and our Town Branch Trail to the west and create 22 miles of uninterrupted trail and be a real legacy for generations to come, which will really transform our city. As we look across the city, we're investing almost 78% of our available capital funds in the suburbs and the rural areas of the city. Now, some work is being done in the downtown that's very visible work, like the restoring the old courthouse, like the Town Branch Commons, but it really affects the entire city.
How much concern, Mayor, do you have about economic gaps in the community? There are many very wealthy people in this region. As you point out, it is a university town. We know there are horse farms, and it's known for retail and for health care. But there are people living in despair as well. We know there are 1,200 or so homeless people in Lexington, as an example.
You know, Bill, I would argue that the most significant issue before our country today, and it affects us in Lexington as well, is income inequality. And when the middle class is not rising at a pace that has historically been represented by America, then we've got a problem, because democracy depends on a rising middle class. We're doing a lot in Lexington to address these issues, as much as arguably any city in our region. We've created an office for homelessness, which has been doing some extraordinarily effective work, helping those who are homeless off the street, those who are chronically homeless, and even have tragically sometimes mental conditions. We are working together with all the homelessness providers in the city now in a very coordinated way. We've also created an affordable housing trust that in 2 years, with a $15 million investment by the city and leveraging that with the private sector, created more than 400 new and rehabilitated apartments and homes for those who need housing in our city. So we're working to address these issues. These are chronic issues, though, that also we need the help that Washington can and should be providing, and we will always need the help from the state as well.
You also raised the local minimum wage.
We did
That was
raise,
something that
yes.
you were hesitant to do for a while. What changed your mind?
Well, what we did was examine it carefully. I've always believed that the minimum wage should be addressed at the federal level, and why is that? So that there's a level playing field. But when the Congress fails to act, then what we've seen is that cities and municipalities across the country have decided that they must take steps in order to bring the equity that we need in jobs and the equity that we need in pay.
One of the most common questions we get is about Centerpoint and what is going to happen down there eventually. There is continued talk of City Hall possibly being a part of that block. There has been an almost $200,000 study that is due to come to you to make a recommendation about what to do on a City Hall. And I know also this week there was some talk about whether that is going to be talked about in public or whether there will be some private meetings about that.
Well, financial negotiations, just like in the private sector, financial negotiations need to be engaged in a meaningful way, in a way where the parties can negotiate, and the best way to do that is for those parties to work together. It's not always effective in a very public forum. I think anybody would recognize that the best way to negotiate is to have those terms done in a setting which allows for all the parties to work out the terms and the conditions, and then to share those terms and conditions. Now, Centerpoint's a challenging project. What we've done as a city is examine several sites. We've asked consultants, those who are experts in this work, and I've done this all my life myself, so I know that this is the way to go about it. It's sort of planning and development 101. You examine sites, and then you rate those sites as to their highest and best value. And that's what the city is doing today. Now,
the developers who want to do Centerpoint, must they have City Hall as part of the project for their plan to work out?
Well, I believe that at one point in time that they said that, but it's not unexpected that a developer, when they're first proposing a project, would ask for a lot of concessions, or a lot of in their terms, they're going to ask for a lot. That's not unexpected, and that's what negotiations are all about.
They wanted a commitment from the city.
Yes, and the city was unwilling to do that.
And so you say that this will be hashed out quietly, and at some point you would come forth with a proposal?
The study will be a public document in a very short time. The council needs to examine it. The administration needs to examine it, and then that will be, of course, that will be made public.
We all know you are spending this weekend weighing a final decision about whether you will run for the U.S. Senate this year, the Democratic nomination. Have you reached your decision?
Well, the filing deadline is next week, and by that time I will have reached a decision. I've been encouraged by a lot of folks that this is a race that should be made. So it's always encouraging to hear that. I've said many times that I enjoy my job and my role as mayor, and that's been a real blessing, and I had many rewards to it.
Do you lean toward it at this point?
Well, Bill, we'll find out after this weekend and the first of next week.
If you run, have you given some thought to how you would continue to operate city government if you're having to travel the state and extensively commit to a campaign?
I'm really fortunate that folks like Albert Miller, who we're going to hear from shortly, throughout our government. But our management team in City Hall is what I consider to be the best that we've ever had. I hear that from others, and that confirms then. It's not just my opinion, but we've got a great leadership in our city today, in our commissioners, in our directors, in our chief administrative officer and our deputy chief administrative officer, and in the mayor's office. So I know that I've got plenty of help whenever I need it.
You're going to tell us to stay tuned on this, right? Well, stay tuned with us. We're coming back in just a moment. We'll be joined by the man in charge of snow removal in Lexington, Albert Miller, and the mayor will stay with us here as we wrap up on WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers. Welcome back to Kentucky Newsmakers on WKYT as a wintry weekend rolls on. Lexington Mayor Jim Gray is here. We've been talking about issues in the city and about his potential bid for the U.S. Senate, and we are joined now by Albert Miller, who is in charge of snow removal efforts for the city of Lexington. He runs the Streets and Roads Division, and we thank everybody for coming in. Appreciate it very much. Mr. Miller, you've been on this job for, you told me, 34 years you've been with the division.
That is correct.
You've seen some changes, huh?
Absolutely, yeah. I came in May of '82.
Yeah.
So since then we have added probably, I think it's around 9 or 1,000 lane miles. And so, plus the equipment is much better. We are computerized now. So, the change has been, it's been evolving, and I enjoy it. I'm glad we changed.
Yeah. What is the process? You get word there's going to be a storm come in, and it, say it may begin as ice or it may begin as, a snowfall, and you're going to be challenged. What kind of preparations do you make?
We've been preparing for this particular one for about 7 days now, and of course, as you probably know, it's changed quite a bit back and forth as to what. But now I think we can dial it down, and we've decided that it looks like now it's going to be more of a snow event than anything else for Lexington anyway. And we're basing we can deal if it is ice. We kind of deal with ice the same way that we would with snow. And the only thing about ice is a lot of times it'll accumulate onto our trees and whatnot, and we have some issues with downed trees. But the way it looks now, the snow, we have a plan, and we are putting it, we're actually putting a written plan together as to how we're going to take on if we get the 10 inches. Yeah. That they're predicting.
Which, as this is airing over the weekend, we will know, and we'll know how this is all working out. What is, how do you treat the roads? We hear of pre-treating. What is it that you put on the road to start with?
We put down a salt brine mix. We have an additive that we add to it this year. Kind of helps it to get down to colder temperatures, and that's typically done if there's no rain forecast before. We can do it up to 48 hours before the event comes that we are expecting it. And then we also do pre-salting sometimes that we had done with this last snow on some of our rural county roads and some of our inside the urban service areas also before the snow event starts.
Then once it's underway, it becomes a scraping and continuing to salt kind of thing?
That is correct, and we have 4 different ranks as far as our ranks go, 1 through 4. And we handle 1s first, and they're usually a main arterial. And on our 2s are some of the connector streets, such as Wilson Downing and Armstrong Mill and those type. And then the 3s are kind of a collector in residential. Mm-hmm. And on our rank 4, they are typically residential streets.
That you might get to.
Well, we hope to.
Yeah, yeah.
And we eventually will.
All right, so, you run the division, you're out there hands-on, and you're keeping your crews moving and so forth. But the mayor and the political leaders, they're getting the blame. They're being, their neighborhood hasn't been touched, phone calls, this sort of thing. As the mayor came to you last year after you had a couple of snows, mm-hmm. What was that conversation about? I'll get the mayor to join in on that.
Well, he was actually asking my opinion on what resources we needed. And he allowed us to get the resources. When I say resources, we were allowed to, we hired more contractors. And so that helped us out tremendously with the last two, the February 16th and the March 6th, I believe it was, those two events that we had. And in doing that, we were able to effectively remove the snow on most of our, at least 92% of the roads in Fayette County.
And Mayor, did you like the plan that Mr. Miller came forward with when he made the recommendations?
I'll put it this way. I know from my business experience that you listen to the guys that are on the ground, that are on the front line, and Albert has demonstrated that he knows what he's doing. His title is the Director of Streets and Roads. I refer to him as the Superintendent of Snow and Salt.
Right.
And he knows what he's doing, and that's a real benefit to our city. When we had this conversation, I did use some of my experience from the construction industry, because what you learn is, as a contractor, you can't do it all. You have to hire subcontractors to do often some of the and achieve the most efficient results, and that's really what we've done here.
Mm-hmm. Are there some places that are city responsibility and some areas that are state responsibility, and that creates some confusion, certainly for people, residents, but maybe even for your crews? Do they know where they need to be?
Yeah, my crews do, for sure.
Yeah.
But and I can see where it's confusing. But everything inside New Circle Road that is in our snow plan, the city is responsible for. And that would be the major arterials, such as, and I'll give you examples, Nicholasville Road, Harrodsburg Road, Versailles Road. Those are state routes, but we do snow removal on them inside New Circle Road. And then, of course, outside is state's responsibility. We do have quite a few subdivisions that are outside New Circle that are ours too. So the state maintains their routes outside New Circle. We do everything inside New Circle. And the subdivisions that are out off some state routes, we're also responsible for.
Do you coordinate with them? I mean, if you're getting word that, the road is iced over in front of Fayette Mall, which again, obviously would be state responsibility, but the call is coming to you, do you pass that information on?
We do, but in those cases, we have to get to, and the Nicholasville Road's a good example. We are going to Man o' War Boulevard, which is the city's responsibility. Man o' War and Citation our city's responsibility, and we're on our way to Man o' War. Very well, we might treat that part of Nicholasville Road just because we're out there.
What is it like to request or demand that your crews work these 12-hour shifts?
A great team, and right now our shifts we're running 24 hours, and we typically run two 12-hour shifts. This storm, the last storm that we just had, we are still kind of winding down from it. So we'll still be working 24 hours, and then we got a full staff that'll be coming in at midnight, because they're predicting around anywhere from 4 a.m. to 8 a.m. for the big storm to start. So we kind of ramp up based on forecast.
Mayor, when you're getting those calls and you're at home, or if it's before you arrive at City Hall or you're at City Hall and you're trying to help coordinate those crews, I mean, it's good to know that you have that team ready to go.
Oh, I'll tell you, well, I've got Albert on speed dial. So, but what's great about Albert is he knows the work so well, and his people, the folks in the Streets and Road Department, they have such a good spirit about this, and they're out there and they're working, their tails off, and they're doing that because they respect this guy right here, and that means a lot for the city, that you've got someone in leadership roles like this who can execute so well.
Well, we appreciate you coming.
I was going to remember also, Bill, our 311 office, our Lex Call, is going to be on duty beginning tonight.
Throughout the duration of the storm. Keep that in mind. And then the trash was not run on Friday, so the pickup will be
next Wednesday, the 27th.
Okay, so everybody can prepare for that. Gentlemen, thanks for coming. We appreciate it. Albert Miller with Streets and Roads, and Lexington Mayor Jim Gray. And we'll be back on WKYT Wrap Up in just a moment with a word about Tuesday's filing deadline in the Commonwealth. Back in a moment. Welcome back into WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers. Now, Tuesday, coming up, January 26th, is going to be a big day in Kentucky for a couple of reasons. One, it is the filing deadline for public office in the state for those who will be running for the elections in May and also in November. For legislative seats as well as federal offices, those filings are done at the Secretary of State's office in Frankfort. Local elections, including most of the city council positions, most of those file in the local county clerk's offices across Kentucky. But if you're running, you want to check with your county clerk to be sure that you don't have to make a trip to Frankfort, because in some cases, even those council seats have to file, especially in cities that stretch into other counties. Now, on the evening of the 26th, Governor Matt Bevin will give his State of the Commonwealth address and his budget message when he will be recommending how Kentucky should spend its $21 billion or so in tax money over the next 2 years, and then the legislature will have an opportunity to look that over and decide which way to go. We want to thank you for joining us for this edition of Kentucky Newsmakers. We'll see you, of course, with updates on the weather throughout the day and on WKYT this morning, starting bright and early at 4:30 here. Have a good week ahead.